At my graduation dinner, beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the hush of fine china, my parents lifted their glasses. What came next wasn't pride, it was a dagger. "We wish you were never born." The entire restaurant froze, but I didn't. For 22 years, I had bent, shrunk, begged for their love. That night, I stood. I laid down every ounce of borrowed shame and walked into the rain, not as their daughter, but as my own beginning. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have loved you most, stay. This is how I turned rejection into rebirth. The restaurant shimmered with chandeliers, each crystal catching light like 1,000 unblinking eyes. Le Chandelier had always been a place where appearances mattered, where couples celebrated anniversaries and executives closed deals. Tonight, my parents chose it for my graduation dinner, though not once did I believe it was truly for me. I sat between them, my navy dress pressed smooth against the velvet chair, my hands folded too tightly in my lap. I scanned the table, my father adjusting his cuff links with surgical precision, my mother aligning her pearl bracelet so it faced outward just right. Every gesture screamed control, performance, presentation. I tried to mimic calm, but inside my stomach clenched and twisted. My father's watch glinted as he checked the time again, as though the celebration was an appointment he had already overstayed. My mother's eyes scanned the room, searching for familiar faces, for potential witnesses who might later gossip about our table. Not once did their gaze linger on me in a way that felt warm. When the champagne arrived, chilled and sweating in its silver bucket, the waiter poured with reverence. My father lifted his flute, his posture straight as though delivering a speech in court. "To graduation," he said. His voice carried across the hushed room, drawing polite smiles from nearby diners. My mother raised her glass, repeating softly, "To graduation." I raised mine too, my fingers trembling against the delicate stem. For a split second, I let myself hope he might add more. Maybe to Avery, who worked so hard, or to our daughter, of whom we are proud. But the pause ended differently. My father's tone sharpened, cold enough to slice through the candlelit air. "Sometimes," he said, "we wish you were never born." The words landed like glass, shattering across marble. My chest constricted, breath stuck in my throat. The clink of cutlery at neighbouring tables froze. Even the waiter, mid-step with a tray of desserts, faltered and retreated. Silence spread, thick and suffocating, broken only by the muted clatter of the kitchen beyond. I sat rigid, every nerve electrified. My body screamed to collapse, to flee, yet something inside me locked still. My mother did not protest, did not flinch. She adjusted her napkin, eyes flicking toward the window as though nothing unusual had been spoken. My father took a sip of champagne, unbothered, as if he had just stated a minor inconvenience. The room itself seemed to pulse with disbelief. Strangers' eyes darted toward me, then away quickly, embarrassed to have witnessed such cruelty. Heat rushed to my face, but my hands, unexpectedly, stayed steady. My ears rang, my vision blurred at the edges, yet I did not cry. I realized in that frozen silence that something had cracked wide open. 22 years of bending, of striving, of shrinking myself to fit their standards, all condensed into one brutal sentence. It wasn't just that they didn't approve of my choices, it was that they denied my very existence, wished it away like an error on a page. I thought of all the nights I stayed awake studying, desperate for grades that might finally earn their smiles. I thought of the mornings I skipped breakfast, sucking in my stomach because my mother said no one respected a girl with weight on her hips. I thought of the holidays where my achievements were compared against the children of family friends, each comparison another cut. All of it led here to this moment when the truth was spoken without disguise. I had never been enough for them, and I never would be. Around me, the restaurant exhaled, conversations resuming in whispers, silverware cautiously clinking again. But the world I knew had already gone silent. I stared into my glass of champagne, bubbles rising and bursting, disappearing before they reached the surface. It felt like a metaphor for my entire life under their roof, a fleeting effort that vanished unacknowledged. In that unbearable quiet, I sat motionless, a ghost at my own celebration. The words still echoed when another memory surged, uninvited, as sharp as the sting of champagne bubbles in my throat. I was 12 again, seated at a table in this very restaurant, the chandeliers unchanged, the air still smelling faintly of butter and charred steak. My father had invited colleagues from his firm, men in dark suits whose laughter filled the room with authority. I had worn a pale dress my mother insisted on, shoes that pinched my toes. That night, I spilled water when a waiter leaned too close. The glass tipped, a minor accident, but my father's face twisted as if I had detonated a bomb. "Such a disappointment," he said loudly, forcing a smile for the table. "She can't even manage a glass of water." His colleagues chuckled politely, though one woman at the table gave me a pitying look. My cheeks burned, my eyes dropped to my lap, and the rest of the night blurred into humiliation. Later, at home, my mother scolded me for making my father look foolish, for staining her new dress with clumsy hands. That single word, disappointment, etched itself deep into me, a scar invisible yet always tender. Now, decades later, here I was, under the same chandeliers, enduring not just disappointment but erasure. The twist wasn't that this was the first time. The twist was that I had been rehearsing for this scene my whole life. Each public humiliation another step toward this grand finale. My breath caught as I blinked back into the present, the clinking of silverware returning around me. I stared at my parents, at the indifference painted across their faces. For a moment I thought I might crumble right there, let their wish come true by folding into invisibility. But then, like a whisper carried through time, I heard my grandmother's voice. "Never let anyone dim your light." Ruth's words had been my secret mantra since childhood. Spoken on afternoons in her sunlit apartment, surrounded by shelves of books that smelled of dust and wisdom. She had been the only one who saw me not as a reflection of the family name, but as a person with a mind, a pulse, a light of my own. Even after she was gone, her voice lingered, surfacing in moments when I most needed saving. Tonight it rose like a lifeline. I placed my napkin carefully on the table, smoothing it with deliberate precision. The motion drew my parents' eyes at last. My father frowned, irritated at the break in decorum. My mother's lips parted as if to caution me against making a scene, but the decision was already made. I rose, the chair scraping against polished floors. A spoon slid from the edge of the table and clattered against the tile with a sharp metallic note. The sound rang louder than it should have, like a bell tolling in acknowledgement. It felt symbolic. I had been dropped from their table, no longer part of their carefully curated feast. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath again. Conversations faltered, forks hovered mid-air. I looked directly at the two people who had given me life, but denied me dignity. My voice, to my surprise, was steady. "If that is what you wish," I said, "then live as if I never existed." No one moved. My father's jaw tightened, his face mottling red. My mother's pearls gleamed, her eyes darting around, nervously, calculating who might be watching. But I didn't wait for their reaction. I turned, picked up my small clutch, and walked. Each step felt both impossibly heavy and impossibly free. Outside, the Boston night greeted me with rain. Cold drops streaked my face, mingling with mascara until black rivers traced down my cheeks. I didn't bother wiping them away. The city blurred in streaks of neon and water as I half ran, half stumbled through the slick streets. My chest heaved, but I kept moving, driven by something more primal than thought. By the time I reached Jenna's apartment, I was drenched, trembling. She opened the door, eyes widening as she took in my soaked dress, my streaked face. I collapsed onto her sofa, the weight of the evening crashing down all at once. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my bag. Calls, texts, each vibration another demand from the very people who had just erased me. I silenced it, curled into the cushions, and for the first time allowed myself to sob. Not for their loss, but for the release of finally stepping out of their shadow. The morning after the dinner, I woke in Jenna's apartment, with eyes swollen from crying and a body that felt hollow. The rain had stopped, but the air in Boston carried a damp chill that settled in my bones. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, letting the silence fill me. My phone, abandoned on the nightstand, was still buzzing occasionally with calls and texts. I knew what they would say before even reading. Anger, rationalizations, maybe even veiled threats. The same cycle I had lived through for years, only now stripped bare. For the first time, I didn't reach for it. Instead, I imagined what it would mean to silence them completely, not just for a night, but for good. The thought terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure. By afternoon, I walked into the phone store 2 blocks from Jenna's. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I told the clerk I needed a new number, a clean slate. "Losing a stalker?" he joked lightly as he clicked through screens. I almost laughed. In a way, yes, but the stalker was my own family, tethering me to an identity that had never fit. Within an hour, I held a phone with a number no one in my bloodline knew. The freedom of it was dizzying. Next came the digital world. I logged into every account I had, social media, email, even shopping sites, and began closing, deleting, resetting. Years of curated images and posts vanished in a series of clicks. With each deletion, guilt pricked at me, birthdays ignored, photos erased, the record of a life my parents could once point to with pride. But alongside the guilt came release, as though I was peeling away layers of a costume stitched too tightly to my skin. The heaviest task was financial. After my grandmother Ruth's passing, my parents had reluctantly covered part of my tuition. They never let me forget it, wielding the money like a leash. I had saved carefully, part from her inheritance and part from small jobs through college. Sitting at Jenna's kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea, I wrote a check for every last cent they had spent. My hand trembled as I signed my name, the ink blotting slightly. Along with the check, I drafted a note on plain white paper. "This clears any obligation between us." The words were stark, almost brutal, but they carried the weight of liberation. When the envelope was sealed, I felt both light and sick. Light because I knew they could no longer claim ownership of me. Sick because a part of me still longed for them to want me without conditions, not as a debt repaid. That longing, I realized, might never fully disappear. But at least now, it would no longer control me. The next day, Jenna and Kai came over to help me pack. Cardboard boxes soon filled the small living room, labelled with black marker. Clothes, kitchen, books. But I wasn't taking everything. This move was about shedding as much as it was about carrying. I donated most of my furniture, leaving behind the couch that had witnessed too many anxious nights. Clothes I had once chosen to please my mother went into donation bags. Shoes that had pinched through years of perfect posture events went the same way. What I kept was deliberate. My books, each margin scribbled with thoughts that felt more like me than anything my parents ever said. My journals filled with ink-heavy confessions. And a small velvet box containing the silver phoenix pendant my grandmother had given me the last Christmas we shared. Its wings spread wide, etched with fine lines. It had always seemed fragile. Now it felt like armour. As Kai taped up the last box, he grinned. "Looks like you're shedding a whole life." "I am," I admitted, surprised at how true it sounded. Outside, my old Honda Civic sat waiting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was sturdy, and it would carry me 3,000 miles west, far enough that the Atlantic would no longer press against my back. I imagined the road unspooling before me, long stretches of asphalt leading toward a future I could choose. When the final box was stacked, Jenna hugged me tightly. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. Her certainty steadied me. Still, as I looked at the boxes of what I had chosen to keep, I felt the duality again, guilt and freedom, loss and possibility. Cutting strings, after all, doesn't just release you, it also leaves you untethered, adrift until you find a new anchor. That was the next step, to leave Boston behind, to start driving, to find out if the horizon could feel like home. While sorting through the last stack of books, I found an old psychology text with a cracked spine. One of the many I had smuggled past my father's disdain. As I lifted it, something slid loose from between the pages. A folded sheet of yellowing paper fluttered to the floor. My breath caught as I recognized my grandmother Ruth's handwriting, looping and deliberate. I unfolded it carefully, the paper soft at the edges. "My dearest Avery, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to remind you in person. Never let anyone dim your light. You may not know this, but I too had to walk away from my own mother. She demanded perfection, measured my worth in how I reflected on her. And when I chose differently, she said I was no daughter of hers. It nearly broke me, but it also set me free. The cycle of rejection is old, older than you or me. Promise me you will not carry it forward. Freedom has a price, but it is better than chains." My vision blurred as I finished. I had always suspected that Ruth's warmth was forged in contrast to something harsher, but I had never known the full truth. Now, in her words, I saw the pattern stretching back generations. Mothers disowning daughters, daughters forced to reclaim themselves. It wasn't just my story. It was the family legacy, passed like a cursed heirloom. The revelation shook me, but it also lit a fire. If Ruth could break free, then so could I. I tucked the letter into my journal, feeling its weight anchor me. Her voice, even from beyond the grave, was telling me I wasn't alone. That mattered more than anything. When the boxes were stacked, taped and labelled, I sat down once more at Jenna's table with the envelope I had prepared. The cheque and the note. My hand hesitated, pen hovering before I signed the final flourish. Avery Hart. The words I had written, "This clears any obligation between us," looked cold on the page, but I needed them to be. Love had never been unconditional with my parents. It had always been bound up in contracts, expectations, leverage. If they valued transactions so much, I would meet them on their terms, then end it. Jenna offered to mail it for me, but I insisted on doing it myself. Walking into the post office, I felt as though I were carrying not just paper, but years of invisible debt. I slid the envelope into the outgoing slot and stood for a moment, hand lingering on the metal. My chest tightened. It was done. Days later, the response came, not directly to me, but through a furious voicemail left on Jenna's answering machine. Richard's voice was clipped, icy with outrage. "Your stunt is childish, Avery. Do you think money settles everything? Do you think you can insult us by treating us like a charity? This is not finished." In the background, I could hear my mother's sharper tone. "You've embarrassed us, Richard. What will people say?" Then came the part that chilled me, that chilled. "I've already spoken to an attorney," my father continued. "We'll see what can be done about this nonsense. You don't just walk away from family." I played the message twice, my pulse thudding in my ears. It was absurd. There was nothing to sue me over. I had repaid them, severed the last financial tie. Yet I knew the threat wasn't about legal standing. It was about power. They had lost control, and this was their last attempt to reassert it. For the first time, I didn't panic. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Their fury proved what I already knew. My freedom was real, and it terrified them. They couldn't forgive me for stepping outside their script. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, I touched the phoenix pendant at my throat and whispered to the memory of my grandmother. The cycle ends here. The road opened in front of me like a ribbon stretched endlessly across the map. Boston shrank in the rearview mirror, its skyline dissolving into a blur of glass and brick. My old Honda Civic hummed steadily, the trunk heavy with books and boxes, the passenger seat stacked with snacks and a road atlas. I had no companion but the hum of tyres and the thoughts I couldn't outrun. The first nights I stayed in motels with buzzing neon signs and thin curtains that barely kept the headlights out. The rooms smelled faintly of bleach, with carpets worn into patterns by countless travellers. Each evening I'd drop my keys onto the chipped nightstand and let the silence settle, thick and strange. I wasn't used to silence. My life had always been filled with my parents' voices, sharp critiques echoing through halls, phone calls laced with subtle disapproval. Now, without them, there was nothing but the whir of the air conditioner and the rattle of pipes in the walls. At first, I felt adrift. I found myself reaching instinctively for my phone, wanting to tell someone, even them, where I was. But each time I reminded myself this was the point, to unlearn dependence, to peel away the reflex of seeking their acknowledgement. So I began to talk aloud to myself, rehearsing the truths I had never dared to say. I don't owe you. I don't need you. I am not your disappointment. The words sounded foreign at first, then less so with repetition, as though I were teaching myself a new language. Driving through Pennsylvania, I passed stretches of farmland where barns leaned tiredly against the horizon. In Ohio, I stopped at a diner where the waitress called everyone Hon and refilled coffee without asking. The ordinary kindness of strangers startled me, each smile a reminder that not all attention was conditional. In Illinois, the flat plains gave way to skies so wide I felt like I could fall upward into them. I slept that night in a motel whose ice machine groaned like a dying animal. Lying awake, I realised the silence no longer frightened me. It was beginning to feel like mine. By the time I crossed into the Dakotas, the Civic had become a moving cocoon. The back seat, piled high with boxes, created a fortress of sorts. I listened to the radio when stations came through, static-filled country songs and late-night talk shows. More often, I turned it off and let the road sing its low, steady song. Mile by mile, I rehearsed, letting go. Mile by mile, I felt lighter. When I reached Montana, the mountains rose like ancient guardians, snow still capping their peaks, even in summer. I pulled over at a rest stop and stood for a long time, wind tugging at my jacket, staring at their immensity. Here, in the shadow of something older and greater than my family's scorn, I felt my anger soften. I wasn't just running away anymore, I was running toward something vast enough to hold me. Days later, Seattle appeared through a curtain of misty rain. The skyline was smaller than Boston's, but framed by water and mountains that made it seem both protected and exposed. My new studio apartment was waiting, tiny with peeling paint near the windows, but mine. I dragged boxes inside, the emptiness echoing until I spread blankets on the floor. A thrift store couch came later, along with mismatched pillows in bright colours that warmed the space. On the wall, I taped a large map of the United States. The line I had driven, 3,000 miles of inked highway, curved across it like a scar that had finally healed over. Among the boxes, I found the envelope Jenna and Kai had slipped in before I left. Inside was a letter written in both their hands. Family isn't always blood. Family is who stays. We are with you wherever you are. Tucked alongside it was the phoenix pendant, its wings spread in silver light. I clasped it around my neck, my fingers lingering at the cool metal. For the first time since walking out of that restaurant, I felt something other than grief or fury. I felt hope, small and fragile, but real enough to breathe in. On the 4th day of driving, somewhere in the Midwest, I pulled off the highway in search of gas and coffee. The small town I stumbled into had one main street lined with faded storefronts and a single white church with a steeple that pierced the grey sky. I parked near the church, intending only to stretch my legs, but as I stepped out, I heard music. An organ's sombre tones carrying through the open doors. Curious, I wandered closer. Inside, the air was thick with lilies and candle smoke. People sat in pews, dressed in black. At the front was a casket, draped in white cloth. I froze, realizing I had intruded on a funeral. I turned to leave quietly, but then I heard the pastor's words. She was only 19. She struggled to find love where it should have been given freely, and when she was denied it, she felt she had no place in this world. My knees weakened. The name wasn't familiar, but her story was. A girl who had ended her life because her family's rejection had hollowed her out. My chest ached as if I had known her. I sank into the back pew, unnoticed among the mourners. The pastor continued, speaking of forgiveness, of hope, but all I heard was the echo of my own fear. That rejection could consume a person until nothing remained. I thought of the night at Le Chandelier, my father's words echoing under chandeliers, my mother's silence complicit. The difference between me and that girl felt terrifyingly slim. Just a matter of endurance, of timing, of one thread holding when another snapped. I pressed a hand to the phoenix pendant at my neck and felt a shiver run through me. I didn't stay for the end. I slipped out as the congregation sang a hymn, their voices trembling against the rafters. Back in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, my forehead pressed against my hands. The image of the casket, the girl's name, embroidered on the program I had glimpsed, burned into me. I whispered aloud, that could have been me. The truth of it shook me so hard I had to sit still until the sobs quieted. Hours later, In another motel off another stretch of highway, I opened my journal to write, but the pages stayed blank. Instead, I reached for the letter I'd found tucked inside my grandmother's book. I unfolded it again, tracing her handwriting with my fingertip. One line stood out now in a way it hadn't before. Freedom comes with loneliness. Prepare to pay the price. I read it again and again, the words sinking like stones. Ruth had known. She had walked away from her own mother, carved a life separate from the weight of expectations. And she had understood that liberation wasn't only relief, it was also solitude. A silence that could sometimes echo louder than any cruel word. I stared at the ceiling of the motel, listening to the hum of a neon sign outside. The loneliness was already there, sitting heavy in my chest. Jenna and Kai had helped me pack, had promised to be with me in spirit, but here, 3,000 miles from their embrace, I was alone. The road didn't speak back when I cried out. The motel walls didn't answer when my heart twisted with longing. And yet, my grandmother's warning didn't feel like despair, it felt like instruction. She was preparing me, even now, for the truth I needed to face. That freedom would test me with emptiness, and I had to learn to fill it myself. I folded the letter gently and tucked it back into my journal. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry this time. Instead, I whispered into the dim motel room, "I'll pay the price, but I'll live." The rain hadn't stopped since I arrived in Seattle, but the city's greyness felt different from Boston's. Here, the clouds seemed less oppressive, almost protective, like a blanket stretched over the skyline. On my first morning walking into the Harborview Center for Human Development, I clutched a borrowed umbrella. My palms damp, not from the weather, but from nerves. The building loomed with glass and steel, modern yet softened by the ivy creeping along its lower walls. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. I signed in at the front desk and followed a graduate assistant up to the 3rd floor, where I would meet Dr. Leora Whitman. She was the one who had championed my application, the reason I had crossed the country to start over. When she entered the conference room, she carried herself with brisk efficiency. Mid-50s, sharp-eyed behind simple glasses, Dr. Whitman gave an impression of someone who didn't waste words. Yet her voice, when she greeted me, held a surprising warmth. "Avery Hart," she said, scanning my file, "top of your class." "Resilience research, yes?" I nodded, suddenly aware of how small my voice sounded. "Yes, it's what drew me to psychology in the first place." She gestured for me to sit. "Good. You'll be working with me on our longitudinal study of attachment and resilience in adolescents who've experienced early life adversity. It's demanding work. Confidential interviews, coding behavioural data, building trust with participants. Some days will feel like breakthroughs, others will feel like we're drowning in charts. But if you stay steady, the results matter." Her words lodged deep. Attachment, resilience, early life adversity. Each phrase felt like it was pulled from my own history. Sitting across from her, I felt as though she could see straight through the professional mask into the girl who had sat in restaurants praying for parental approval. By the time our meeting ended, my nervousness had settled into determination. I wanted this, not because it would impress anyone, but because it mattered. The days that followed were a blur of orientation, reading case histories and learning the research software. In the evenings, I returned to my studio, where boxes still lined the walls and rain tapped the windows like a steady metronome. Alone, I felt the weight of Ruth's warning about loneliness. Yet during the day, surrounded by work that reflected my own wounds back at me, I began to sense a purpose forming, fragile but real. It was through one of the research assistants that I met Sophia, a graphic designer who lived in the same building as me. She was quick to laugh, her voice carrying like a melody down the hallway. One evening, she invited me to her book club. I almost declined. Old habits made me wary of new groups. But something in her insistence nudged me. The book club gathered in a cluttered living room, fragrant with incense and tea. People sat cross-legged on rugs, arguing about characters and themes. No one asked me where I came from or what my family did. They only cared about my thoughts on the story. It startled me how freeing that felt. Through Sophia, I met Marco Ellis, a high school English teacher with calm eyes and an easy manner. He asked questions with genuine curiosity, never rushing to fill silences. We talked about literature, about the way certain novels mirrored real life too closely to ignore. For the first time in years, I felt myself leaning into conversation without fear of judgment. When November arrived, Sophia invited me to join her family for Thanksgiving. My instinct was to say no. The holiday had always been brittle, a performance in my parents' house. But she insisted with a grin. My mum always cooks enough for an army. One more plate won't matter. Her family's home was chaotic, warm, alive with the smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon. Her brothers teased each other across the table. Her parents argued good-naturedly about how to carve the bird. And her grandmother insisted everyone eat second helpings. No one asked invasive questions. No one measured my worth against someone else's child. I sat there, surrounded by clattering forks and easy laughter, and felt something I had nearly forgotten, belonging. That night, walking home, in the drizzle, the warmth of their table clung to me. My coat was damp, but my chest carried a quiet heat. For once, Thanksgiving wasn't a stage. It was simply a meal shared, and in that simplicity lay the profound. One rainy afternoon, as I sifted through files for the resilience study, a case history caught my eye. It described a 12-year-old boy whose mother had left abruptly when he was 6. The file detailed his struggles, difficulty forming friendships, bouts of anxiety during school assemblies, a habit of shrinking into silence when called upon in class. As I read, my chest tightened. The words blurred into memories of myself at 12, sitting in that restaurant under chandeliers. My father calling me a disappointment before his colleagues. Though the boy's abandonment was different, his mother physically gone, mine emotionally absent, the echo was unmistakable. The loneliness in his profile was the loneliness that had stalked me through childhood. I stared at the pages, trying to maintain professional detachment, but my throat closed. For a moment, I was back in my bedroom as a girl, clutching a pillow to muffle sobs so my parents wouldn't hear. The past surged so vividly that I had to step outside the office, pacing the hallway until my breathing steadied. When I returned, I made notes with extra care, determined to honour this boy's story. He wasn't just data on a chart. He was living proof that the patterns of neglect and dismissal cut deep, shaping the way a child saw himself. The empathy I felt sharpened into resolve. If my pain could help me understand, then perhaps I could turn it into something more than scars. But pain, I would learn, has a way of circling back in unexpected forms. It began with a text from an old college acquaintance. "Hey, are you okay? I heard you're in treatment." I frowned, confused, and asked what they meant. The reply came quickly. "A friend of my parents mentioned your folks said you had a breakdown after graduation. They said you're in therapy full time, not working. Is that true? Heat rushed to my face. My hands shook as I typed back, not true. I'm working at Harbourview, doing research. But the message haunted me. My parents weren't satisfied with cutting me off. They were rewriting the narrative. They couldn't admit I had walked away, so they invented a story that made them the sympathetic figures, burdened with a fragile daughter who'd collapsed under pressure. It was neater that way, more palatable for their social circle. A week later, another message came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I hope you're getting the help you need. Your parents are worried sick. The words stung worse than any insult because they painted me as weak, unstable, defined again by their version of me. For nights afterward, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my studio, rain tapping the glass. My first instinct was to fight back, to call and demand they stop, to tell the world the truth. But then I remembered Ruth's letter. Freedom comes with loneliness. Prepare to pay the price. Maybe this was part of the price, allowing lies to spread, because I no longer owed them my defence. In the silence, I found clarity. If I argued, I would still be tethered. If I corrected every rumour, I would still be living inside their narrative. But if I chose silence, deliberate, strategic silence, then I reclaimed the only story that mattered, the one I was writing for myself. So I didn't respond to the acquaintances who reached out. I didn't chase down the whispers. Instead, I poured myself into the work, into the boys' case file, and the others like it. Every time I read a story of a child left unseen, I thought, this is why I'm here. Not to prove my parents wrong, but to prove myself right. On Thanksgiving night, after returning from Sophia's family home, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence across the page in bold ink. I will not let them define me anymore. And with that, I closed the book, letting the words settle like a vow. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, nestled between research updates and conference invitations. Its subject line was stark: we need to talk. The sender, my father. My stomach lurched as though the floor had dropped away beneath me. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. Your mother and I will be in Seattle next weekend for a medical conference. We would like to meet with you. Please respond with a time and place. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of silence or the poison they had spread about me. Just expectation, as if I was still the daughter trained to comply. My hands shook so badly I had to set the laptop aside. The room tilted. I felt the old panic clawing back, tight chest, shallow breaths, the familiar pull of their control, even from across the country. I hadn't seen them since that night at Le Chandelier, and now the thought of facing them again made me feel 12 years old, small and helpless. I called my therapist, voice cracking. She fit me in that evening. Sitting across from her, I confessed the fear that still gripped me. If I don't meet them, I'll feel like I'm still running, but if I do, I'm terrified they'll tear me down again. She leaned forward, calm and steady. You don't owe them anything. But if you choose to meet, it must be on your terms. Boundaries, a public place, a set time. You leave when you need to. We made a plan together, writing it down so it felt concrete. 30 minutes, no more. A busy cafe downtown where witnesses would prevent escalation. Afterward, I would go straight to Marco's apartment where support waited. And most importantly, I would not let them define the narrative. That night, I barely slept, my mind rehearsing every possible scenario. Would they beg for forgiveness? Would they lash out again? Would they pretend nothing had happened? By morning, I realised it didn't matter. I couldn't control their behaviour, only my own. When Saturday came, I dressed with deliberate care. Charcoal grey slacks, a blue silk blouse, and Ruth's phoenix pendant resting against my collarbone. Armour disguised as jewellery. My reflection in the mirror looked steady, even if my insides quaked. The cafe bustled with weekend chatter, espresso machines hissing like steam engines. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the door. My palms sweated as I wrapped them around a mug of tea, waiting. At precisely 11, they appeared. My father in business casual that probably cost more than my rent, my mother immaculate in a cream dress and her ever-present pearls. They scanned the room and spotted me instantly. My father led the way, hand extended as if this were a business negotiation. "Avery," he said, smiling tightly, "you look well." I shook his hand briefly, then gestured for them to sit. My mother's eyes flicked over me critically before she offered, "You've lost weight." It was the first thing out of her mouth. I skipped small talk. "Why are you here?" My father cleared his throat. "Your behaviour after graduation was distressing. The way you cut contact, it was immature. We want things to return to normal." The word normal sent a chill through me. Normal meant their rules, their control, their constant dismissal of who I was. I sat straighter, drawing strength from the pendant at my throat. "There won't be a return to normal," I said evenly. "But there could be something new, on conditions." They looked startled. My father narrowed his eyes. "Conditions?" "Yes." I counted them off slowly, making sure each landed. "First, acknowledgement of the harm you've caused. Not just that night, but over years. Second, respect for my boundaries and choices from here on. Third, a willingness to build a relationship based on mutual respect, not authority." Silence stretched. My father's jaw worked as though chewing stone. My mother blinked rapidly, lips pressed tight. Around us, the cafe hummed on, oblivious. But at our table, a fault line had opened. For the first time in our history, the terms were mine. My mother was the first to break the silence. Her hands, perfectly manicured, fidgeted against her coffee cup, a rare crack in her composure. "You think we were cruel," she began, her voice low, "but you don't understand. My mother, your grandmother Ruth, she pushed me the same way. She said I had to marry well, to host perfectly, to never let the family look weak. If I failed, she told me I was a disgrace. That's what I lived with." The confession startled me. For a moment I almost softened. I pictured Ruth, the woman who had been my sanctuary, turning that sharp edge on her own daughter. A painful dissonance cut through me. Could it be true? Had my grandmother, who urged me never to let anyone dim my light, once been the one dimming hers? But as quickly as the sympathy rose, I steadied myself. Because even if my mother's story was true, it didn't absolve her. Pain passed down is still pain. "Maybe she hurt you," I said carefully, "but you could have broken the cycle. Instead, you passed it to me." My mother's eyes glistened for a second, but she looked away, her lips pressed into their familiar thin line. The moment of vulnerability closed as quickly as it had opened. My father leaned forward, seizing the lull. His tone was practiced, smooth, the voice of a man who had negotiated in countless boardrooms. "Avery," he said, "let's not dwell on the past. We can make this right. There's an event next month, a gala for the Harbour Foundation. Influential people, donors, leaders in law, medicine, politics. If you came with us, it would show everyone that you're doing well. It would be a fresh start for all of us. The words sounded generous on the surface, an olive branch, an invitation. But underneath, I recognised the trap. It wasn't about me. It was about appearances. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted a trophy to parade. Proof they had produced a successful daughter after all. I set my cup down slowly, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "You're not hearing me," I said. "I'm not here to make you look good. I'm not a prop for your reputation." My father's jaw tightened. "This could open doors for you. Connections, opportunities." "I have doors," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise, but it carried steel. "I have work I believe in. I have colleagues who respect me. I don't need your gala." A murmur rippled from the table beside us. A young couple glanced over, sensing the tension. My mother hissed softly, "Avery, lower your voice. People are watching." For once, I didn't care. I leaned back, letting the weight of my words settle. I don't want normal. I don't want appearances. If you can't accept me on my terms, then there's nothing left to discuss. The cafe felt suddenly too bright, too loud, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, it all swelled around us, making the silence at our table sharper. My father stared at me, unblinking. He wasn't used to being refused. Finally, he said, clipped and formal, "So this is your decision, to sever ties publicly." I met his gaze evenly. The ties were already severed. You just never admitted it. He pushed back his chair, the scrape against the tile, drawing more stares. My mother lingered a moment longer, her eyes unreadable, before rising to follow him. They left without another word, the door swinging shut behind them. I sat still, heart pounding, but beneath the tremor was something stronger, relief. They had tried to lure me back with guilt, with vulnerability, with promises of status, but for the first time I had refused all of it. When my 30 minutes were up, I stood, dropped a few bills on the table, and walked out into the Seattle drizzle. The rain touched my face, cool and cleansing, and I realised I wasn't trembling anymore. In the weeks following the cafe meeting, a strange quiet settled over my life. My parents didn't vanish completely, but their presence became intermittent, like static flickering at the edge of a radio signal. An occasional letter arrived, my mother's neat handwriting on cream stationery, my father's terse emails typed with businesslike brevity. A birthday card showed up late, with a generic note scrawled beneath a hallmark message. "Proud of your dedication." It rang hollow, a phrase crafted for optics rather than heart. I chose carefully which messages to answer. If a note carried a trace of honesty, acknowledgement however small, I responded briefly. If it smelled of manipulation or veiled criticism, I let silence answer for me. At first, the guilt pressed heavy. Years of conditioning whispered that I owed them acknowledgement, that ignoring them made me ungrateful. But over time, that voice quieted. Boundaries, I realised, were not cruelty, they were oxygen. Meanwhile, my work at Harbourview flourished. The paper I had co-authored with Dr. Whitman on adolescent resilience was accepted into a respected journal. When the email arrived, I stared at the screen for a long time, stunned. My name, Avery Hart, printed alongside scholars I had admired from a distance. It was validation of a kind my parents had never given me, but more importantly, it was proof to myself. I was not the failure they had painted me to be. The long nights coding data, the hours spent interviewing teenagers who carried invisible wounds, it all meant something. And in their stories, I saw reflections of my own. Each breakthrough, each small step toward understanding how children rebuild, after being broken, felt like healing stitched into both my research and my life. Outside of work, connections deepened. Sophia remained a bright thread in my days, pulling me into circles where laughter was easy and conversation genuine. Through her, I saw Marco more often. He had a way of listening that made me feel weightless, like I didn't have to defend every word. Over coffee, he'd ask what book had kept me up the night before, or what part of my research fascinated me most. I found myself opening pieces of my story, cautiously at first, then more freely. One evening, after a long day at the centre, Marco walked me home. Rain slicked the sidewalks, and our breath puffed in the chill. We paused under the glow of a street lamp. "You always seem like you're carrying something heavier than you let on," he said gently. I hesitated, then nodded. "I am, but I'm learning how to set it down." He didn't press for details. Instead, he simply said, "You don't have to carry it alone." The words lingered with me long after he left, warming the corners of my solitude. December arrived, and with it came an ache I hadn't anticipated. Holidays had always been tense performances with my family, but they were still traditions. Now, facing them without even pretense, I felt untethered. Sophia noticed. "Come with me," she insisted. "My friends do a misfit Christmas. It's for all of us who don't go home." On Christmas Eve, I walked into a living room strung with mismatched lights, the scent of pine and cinnamon thick in the air. People in sweaters and socks lounged on the floor, trading small, thoughtful gifts wrapped in newspaper and twine. Someone handed me a mug of hot cider. Marco was there too, his smile lighting the room more than the string lights did. We played board games, sang carols off key, laughed until our cheeks hurt. At midnight, someone suggested we each share one thing we were grateful for. When it was my turn, I looked around the room, at Sophia's contagious grin, at Marco's steady gaze, at the strangers who welcomed me without asking for credentials. My throat tightened. "I'm grateful for this," I said softly, "for being here, for being seen." The room erupted in cheers and clinking mugs. For once, Christmas wasn't a stage. It wasn't a test I could fail. It was just joy, unpolished and real. Walking home later, the cold air bit at my cheeks, but my chest glowed. I realised then that family could be chosen, pieced together from kindness, stitched not by obligation but by love freely given. And maybe, just maybe, I had finally begun to believe I deserved it. The new year brought a sharp reminder that my parents had not given up on rewriting the narrative. One morning, an email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "An opportunity for us all." My pulse quickened as I opened it. It was from Richard. He congratulated me on the publication of my paper, a detail he must have gleaned second-hand, then pivoted to his proposal. "Your mother and I are prepared to create a small family foundation in your name," he wrote. "We could fund your research, expand your influence. Of course, it would require a few public appearances with us to demonstrate unity, a gala or two, perhaps a photo spread. This is how you build credibility, Avery. Let us help you." My stomach turned. It wasn't funding, it was a leash. He was dressing control in the language of generosity. For a brief moment, fear gnawed at me. Harbourview grants were competitive. Money was always tight. What if I needed the support to keep my work afloat? I closed my eyes, the words of Ruth's letter rising again. Freedom comes with loneliness. Prepare to pay the price. I had walked too far to sell myself back into their version of family. With calm hands, I typed my reply. "Thank you, but I decline." My work does not require your sponsorship, nor do I require public appearances. Please respect this boundary. I expected dread to follow, but instead, something remarkable happened. That same week, Dr. Whitman called me into her office. She smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Avery, we've been impressed with your dedication. The board has approved a new grant, and we'd like you to serve as project coordinator. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Coordinator. A promotion. More responsibility, more trust, better pay. I walked out of her office dazed, the irony not lost on me. The very week I refused my parents' conditional funding, Harbourview gave me advancement on my own merit. That night, I stood in my studio, staring at the city lights, flickering through the rain-streaked window. I whispered aloud, "I don't need them." The words rang true for the first time, not a defiant mantra, but a simple fact. Yet even as my professional life bloomed, my personal life stirred with deeper questions. Marco had become a steady presence. Dinners after long days, walks through the misty parks, quiet conversations about books and dreams. His presence was easy, comforting. Still, beneath my gratitude lurked fear. One evening, as we lingered in his apartment, the glow of a lamp soft against the shelves of novels, he reached for my hand. "Avery," he said gently, "I love you." The words hit me like a storm. My heart raced, not with joy, but with panic. I pulled my hand back, staring at him. "Don't," I whispered. "Please, don't say that unless there's a condition, because that's how it always works." "Love, but only if I look right, choose right, behave right." I can't survive that again. He didn't flinch. His eyes stayed steady on mine. "Avery, listen. You don't need to earn love, not mine, not anyone's who truly cares. I don't want you because of your achievements or your scars. I want you because you're you. That's enough." Tears stung my eyes. I shook my head, struggling to believe. But what if I fail? What if I'm too much or not enough? He leaned closer, his voice firm but soft. "Then I'll still be here because love isn't a contract. It's a choice I make every day. And I choose you." The dam inside me broke. All the years of conditional affection, of bracing for the rug to be pulled out, collapsed beneath the weight of his simple truth. I wept, not from sorrow, but from release. His words didn't erase the past, but they cracked open a space where something new could grow. For the first time, I let myself believe. Maybe love could exist without permission slips, without conditions, without fear. The ballroom was vast, filled with the low hum of conversation and the shuffle of papers against lecterns. It was the annual National Conference on Human Development, a place where researchers, practitioners, and policymakers gathered to exchange ideas. I had attended before, as an assistant, a silent observer taking notes while others spoke. This year, however, I stood behind the podium, the spotlight washing over me. My slides glowed on the screen, emotional validation and adolescent resilience. My heart pounded, but when I touched the phoenix pendant at my collarbone, the cool silver steadied me. It was more than jewellery now, it was a talisman, a reminder of survival. I began with a story not about myself, but about the patterns we saw in our research, how children who felt consistently invalidated by caregivers developed fragile senses of worth, often doubting their own emotions. When a child hears, directly or indirectly, that their feelings are inconvenient or exaggerated or shameful, I said, my voice finding its rhythm, they internalise the message, "I am wrong for existing as I am." Around the room, heads nodded, pens scratched across notebooks. I moved through charts and case studies, weaving in narratives of adolescents who had rebuilt themselves through therapy, through community, through even the smallest acknowledgements that their feelings mattered. Validation, I concluded, is not indulgence. It is survival. It is the difference between silence and resilience. As I spoke the final words, my eyes landed briefly on the pendant. In its etched wings, I saw my own story, years of dismissal, of striving and shrinking, now transmuted into something useful. The applause that followed was warm, genuine, not thunderous, but steady, like a current carrying me forward. I stepped away from the podium lighter than I had expected, as though a burden had been set down in front of everyone to see. Afterward, colleagues approached with handshakes and congratulations. Dr. Whitman clapped me on the shoulder, her expression approving in its understated way. "You did well," she said simply, which from her was high praise. That evening, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window overlooking the city skyline. The pendant rested against my skin, and I let myself breathe deeply, slowly. For so long, my parents' words, "We wish you were never born," had defined the borders of my life. Tonight I had spoken a counter-narrative into existence. I was born, I endured, I matter. My laptop pinged with a new email. Expecting another conference follow-up, I opened it casually. But when I saw the sender, Elaine Hart, my breath stalled. The message was short, almost shockingly so. "Avery, I know words cannot undo the past. I am sorry. I hope one day you might find it in your heart to forgive me." I stared at the screen, my emotions tangled. Anger flared, too little, too late. Sadness followed. Why had she never said this when it mattered? And beneath both, a strange calm, the recognition that this was not about her words at all. It was about my choice in how to respond. I typed slowly, deliberately, each word measured. "I wish you healing." Then I hit send, no more, no less. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was closure, my way of acknowledging the wound without reopening it. My life no longer hinged on whether they approved, apologized, or understood. That power had shifted. I closed the laptop and looked out at the city lights, shimmering against the night. The pendant lay cool against my collarbone, the phoenix etched in silver, wings outstretched. In its reflection, I saw myself, not erased, not diminished, but rising. The idea came to me late one night, long after the conference applause had faded. I sat at my desk in the small apartment that had become home, flipping through my grandmother Ruth's old letter for the 100th time. Her words echoed again. Freedom comes with loneliness. Prepare to pay the price. She had carried her own wounds, yet she had fought to leave behind something gentler for me. And I realized that if I wanted to truly break the cycle, I needed to turn my survival into something larger than myself. So I began sketching out a plan, a small scholarship fund, modest at first, aimed at adolescents who, like me, had been pushed aside by family rejection. It wouldn't change the world overnight, but it could change one young life at a time. I named it the Ruth Halpin Memorial Grant for Resilient Youth. In the proposal, I wrote, "This award is for those who have been told they are not enough, to remind them they already are." When I presented the idea to Dr. Whitman, she studied me in her quiet way, then nodded. "It's ambitious," she said, "but it's needed, and you're the right one to carry it." With Harborview's support and a few small donations from Sophia's circle, the fund became real. The first award letter went out to a 17-year-old girl who wanted to study counselling after years in foster care. Reading her grateful response, I felt a wave of peace unlike anything I had known. It was as if Ruth's legacy had taken root, blooming through me into the world. The scholarship was more than a program, it was a statement. It said, "The cycle ends here." It said, "Rejection doesn't get the last word." Months passed, and winter softened into spring. Seattle's skies shifted from relentless grey to patches of blue, and cherry blossoms scattered across sidewalks like pale confetti. On a Saturday morning, Marco, Jenna, Kai and I met by the waterfront. The air smelled faintly of salt and coffee drifting from nearby cafes. The city stirred awake behind us, but at the edge of the water, time slowed. We walked along the path, shoulders brushing, laughter rising easily. Marco carried a thermos of tea, handing it around as the breeze nipped at our fingers. Jenna snapped photos of the sunrise with her phone, declaring each one frame-worthy. Kai told a ridiculous story about his garage band's latest rehearsal, complete with exaggerated sound effects that made us double over laughing. As the sky shifted from pink to gold, I fell a few steps behind, letting their voices wash over me. I looked out across the rippling water where the sun lifted itself over the horizon. In that quiet moment, a thought rose clear as birdsong. I was not unborn. I was reborn. The words settled deep, filling spaces I hadn't realised were still hollow. My parents' curse, "We wish you were never born," no longer haunted me. It had transformed into something else entirely. The spark that pushed me to claim my own existence, my own rebirth. I watched my friends, my chosen family, moving ahead, waiting for me with smiles. They had no obligation to me, no blood tie binding them, and yet they'd stayed, loved, lifted me. Their presence proved that love without conditions was real. I touched the phoenix pendant at my throat, its silver warmed by the rising sun. It was no longer just a reminder of survival. It was a symbol of becoming. I jogged to catch up, slipping easily into their laughter, the warmth of belonging wrapping around me like the morning light. Whatever storms lay ahead, I knew I could face them. Not because I had erased my past, but because I'd rewritten it. The city glittered in the distance, alive with promise. The tide whispered against the shore. And I walked forward, not as the girl my parents had wished away, but as the woman I had chosen to become,